In this video I'm going through some tips and tricks I've picked up when practicing air-to-air refueling in the DCS Viper. This video is not going to cover how to find the tanker or how to set up the aircraft, etc. This is covered in a lot of other great tutorials on YouTube, so I will focus on tips for how to get contact and how to stay on the boom. The main tips of this video is going to be how to get into good starting position, why you should fly formation first and always think and fly ahead of the lights. Lastly, why you should focus on making two-part corrections, and why you don't need to strive for a perfectly centered position. Let's get started. It's very important to get a good starting position. This will make your life a whole lot easier. My goal in the starting position is always to get on center line, get on altitude, making sure the left light is centered and stabilized before I make my move forward. This is very useful because the visual references and the scale of the tanker will stay very similar. If you deviate in altitude, then the visual references will change much faster, and it's easier to get into pilot-induced oscillation compared to if you deviate forward or aft.
Ready, recontact.
Lastly, I'm being mindful of the closure rate. I want this to be as slow as possible so I do not overshoot. In the pre-contact position, I try to line up the boom with the bore side cross or on top of my head. This will put me in a good position, both altitude-wise and on center line. I'm trying to keep center line, staying right under the yellow line. I'm trying to build a sight picture of where the outside engines of the tanker are compared to my field of view. I also monitor the right light to get a sense of my closing rate. I want to come off the throttle just before I reach the right center light, so I can stop the forward motion and not overshoot. If I overshoot now, I will end up chasing the lights, and that's not where I want to be. So in this position, try to take a mental note of the sight picture. For me, I keep track of where the tankers outside the engines are relative to my field of view. Always get comfortable here before changing your focus to the right lights. This is important because if you need to adjust for both altitude and speed at the same time, your corrections need to be much more precise and complex. For example, if you're low and pull the nose up, you will lose speed, making you fall aft. If you're aft and low, you would need to put in more power in versus if you're only aft. The same applies if you're forward and high. You will need to take more power off as you will gain speed when dumping the nose, compared to if you're only correcting for being too far forward. It's important to focus on flying formation first and focus on the lights second, because you will notice a change in your formation position before the lights will change. If you wait until the light change before you make the correction, the lights will have changed even more by the time your engines have spooled up or down, and you will need to make additional and bigger adjustments in power, which may lead to pilot-induced oscillations. Also, it's not always that easy to visually see the lights due to different lighting or weather effects in the mission. When focusing on flying formation first and the lights second, this will make it easier for you to stay ahead of the lights. So always try to anticipate where the lights will change. This will get easier with practice. But if you're aft and you add power, you must be aware that the first correction most likely will not be perfect, and you must anticipate that the lights will instruct you to move aft again. It can sometimes be easier to purposely be too far aft and push the right light forward in relation to the inputs you intend to make, rather than reacting to an already centered light. If you stay in front of the lights and you're anticipating where they will go, you will be able to stay on the boom while moving around, and you won't need to stay completely centered to get a full tank of gas. You can compare this to flying the ball when landing on a carrier. It's easier to start off with the high ball and work the ball down, rather reacting to an already centered ball. why I make two-part corrections. I think about it like this. The first correction is the power or attitude correction I make to change to my intended position. The second correction is to maintain that position. This is the most important one, because if you're too slow to adjust with your second correction, your first correction might actually push you away from your intended position. So I'm always mindful about how much I need to adjust with my second correction. If you leave the throttle in the same power setting for too long, you will quickly fall behind and end up having to react to the lights instead of anticipating the next change. If you're too far forward and try to correct with a reduction in power, you must immediately come back on the power to maintain that correction. If you let off the power for too long, you will end up too far aft and in need of making a bigger power increase to stop the backwards motion. Or if you slip aft, increase the power slightly and then immediately take half of that correction back. As soon as I notice that the correction made an effect relative to the tanker and not the lights, I put the throttle back where it was. The lights will respond accordingly.
Transfer complete.
The same applies to up and down adjustments. Do not wait for the lights and always be ready to make the second correction. When position relative to the tanker has changed, then assess how and if the lights changed. Another tip is to load up the jet. A heavier jet will make it easier to make small corrections compared to a clean one.
Ready, recontact.
So to summarize, try to get a good starting position and focus on flying a good vertical position first. Always try to fly ahead of the lights and do not wait for the lights to change before you make the correction. After you made a two-part correction and you see the position relative to the tanker has changed, be ready to make a new two-part correction immediately. Air refueling is a game of corrections. You will never stay in the perfect position for a long time. As you're taking more fuel and gaining weight, you will need more power to hold the same position. As the boom operator will help you out a bit, you have some wiggle room to make adjustments. So don't focus too hard on staying completely centered on the lights. I focus more on keeping the left light centered and give myself some room for adjustments on the right light.
Contact. You're taking fuel.
I hope these tips help you out. Thanks for watching and good luck.